Hey, what's up guys? Little man with a big opinion here. Today's video, we're gonna have a discussion. I just got done watching the Jubilee debate. And if you have never watched any of their stuff before, they quite interestingly get one person on one side of an argument and get 10 to 20 people on the other side of the argument, and that one person has to defend their side. And it's typically fairly controversial topics. What I find most interesting is most of the ones that I have watched, it's typically the one person that shows that they understand more about what's being discussed. And, about a third of the people are like, hey, this person's pretty smart. They know what they're talking about. Another third, they argue with the person the entire time, and, nothing will ever tell them that someone thinking a different way is, more correct. And about the other third, just kind of sit there and nod their head and shake their head. This one, they had someone on there, basically saying obesity is a choice and it's a problem. And, the very first person that comes up is like an eating disorder therapist, and then they have, people that come up and, they talk about how fit they are, even though they have a bunch of body fat, and, on and on and on they go. And I feel like I get to talk about this one because, I'm a type 2 diabetic. I figured out when I was 188 pounds at 5'2", and now I'm sitting in the 125, 130 range, still 5'2". I'm a short dude. And there is a infinite amount of, life being better in the current state that I'm in. I can explain what doctors have said to me. And for the most part, I agree with, I think her name was Julie. I bring this up a lot on this prepping channel. Subscribe, like, share, do all those sort of things. Because, as much as I like the idea of prepping, I really, really like the idea of, a Minuteman and setting up a militia. And, I think we could solve a lot of issues if you kind of followed along with what I'm saying. I think we're the first time in our history where we're maintaining a fairly massive military, when, previously it was the National Guard or, the militia that did stuff. And, when we actually got into a conflict, that's when we ramped up the military. But, that being said, 188-pound me, was not rucking dozens of miles, was not doing it healthily, not doing a whole ton of running, not doing a whole ton of weightlifting. So if you're going off this Minuteman philosophy, you're kind of a loot drop, as some of the online preppers say. You spend all this time and money getting all this cool stuff. If you can't protect it and defend it, then all you did was gather a bunch of stuff for someone else to take, because they're in a lot better position physically, and they're gonna outpace you. That's just how that goes. So, first doctor I had, he was awesome. He essentially said, "You have too much body fat. You're at 30+%. Uh, you know, your insulin can't keep up. You're actually overworking your pancreas, and you're probably gonna have to take insulin forever unless you do something different with your life." So we went through, lost 30 pounds in the first year, got myself down to about 150, and sleep improved. My joints didn't hurt anywhere near as bad. Added some muscle onto it, could do running, swimming, that kind of stuff, more frequently. And the amount of medicine that I was taking dropped. People talk about healthcare costing an arm and leg in the United States. I don't know an exact percentage, but a lot of problems can be solved through diet and exercise. A massive amount. So, I went from having to poke myself 4 times a day for insulin, taking 2 different pills twice a day, to, now I just take metformin. I think my doctor continues to give it to me because it has other health benefits than just, being diabetic. No, super tired. The baby wanted to be up a lot last night. I'm fine with missing out on sleep because of my child, not because I'm very overweight and I have to get up and pee several times in the middle of the night. So, I mean, that's a small benefit of, eating better and exercising 3 to 5 times a week. I would really like more people in my community to think this way. If something bad happens, I think we have plenty of people that would pick up their firearms and, go take care of the problem. The thing that I worry about is you get 800 meters into this and it's like, okay, we need to walk, we need to stop and take a break. And it's like, dude, I can still see the city limit sign. Like, this is a liability. You almost want to train as well as soldiers train, because you're essentially filling the role of the soldier as a volunteer. Push comes to shove, you're part of the group that is, defending this area just like the military would, except there's a lot more of you, and you could get there a lot more rapidly. You gotta be able to handle this stuff. If you put your entire kit on, let's say you hop on the treadmill, you set it at 3 miles an hour. If you're winded and slowing the treadmill down before you hit, even 3 miles, a lot more training's got to happen. It's going to help out lowering that body fat percentage. Just inherently, you are carrying less weight. You don't got to look like Chris Hemsworth in, Guardians of the Galaxy or anything. But you shouldn't look like Chris Hemsworth, when he was depressed that half the universe got destroyed and, he just got, all nice, fat, and lazy. There needs to be a happy medium. Uh, Even if you don't do it for the prepping side of things, you do it for your own health, you do it for, even mentally. I can look at myself in the mirror, and if I tilt just the right way, I can kind of see abs poking out. And mentally, that makes me feel good. Uh, mentally, I know I'm stronger. I can do more push ups in a row. I can, run and hike for a longer amount of time. More pull ups. Poundage of weight is going up. That's something that should make you feel good because it's an accomplishment. You're doing something better than you did previously. So even if you're not thinking from like a Minuteman, kind of perspective, the person in better health is going to be a better Minuteman if the time comes, when the time comes, than the person that is not in good health. There's a ton of other skills and, tactics and training and a bunch of other stuff to do to, really make you something. It was one of those, we tell you facts of the day to make you smarter. And they were talking about people have done polling, and it was, men being overconfident. And it was like 46% of men think that they could safely land an airplane. This percentage of men, thinks that they could fight a wolf. This percentage. And, they were making fun of these percentages. And one of their polls had said, 58% of men believe they could survive, in a wilderness survival situation, until search and rescue or someone found them. I'm sitting here looking at this question like, I'm someone that's going to write yes on this. I know where to find safe drinking water. I know the plants that you can eat and, how to get animals. I keep stuff like that on me so that I'm more prepared to handle that sort of thing. And that was one of the things that the Minutemen had to be able to do. They had their rifle and, ammo. They would bring along, a little bit of food, for a day or two. And then they were essentially bringing their hiking pack that they could procure food along the way. And they could set up a shelter. So they've got a pack with, a quarter axe or a hatchet and a bedroll, maybe some sort of tarp, their flint and steel, they're this, all of the stuff that, we're trekking through the woods, trying to find these Native Americans that attacked the city. We might be gone for 2 days, we might be gone for 3 weeks. I've got everything I need to make it for 3 weeks. Very few people keep that stuff with them all the time. But, I think it also comes back to if you're more physically fit, you could probably survive longer in the wilderness. I know there's a fat person out there that's probably saying, I've got more energy stored, I'm going to survive longer. Good for you. As a former fat person, based off of science, 30+% body fat, I don't ever want to go back. I'm not going to make fun of you for being overweight. I'll just be critical if you're not doing anything to try to fix it. If you are actively trying to fix it, I will help you out the entire step of the way. So, if you got questions, leave them in the comment section down below. Subscribe to the channel if you like this kind of stuff. Like the video if you liked it. Dislike it if you don't. Don't really care. But until then, I'll catch you on the next one.